What's up, guys? Let's get started.
Elliot had always wondered why motivation felt like a fleeting visitor, dropping by unexpectedly, only to vanish just as quickly. Some days, he'd wake up energized, ready to conquer the world. Other days, even getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. He couldn't understand it. One evening, after yet another afternoon spent scrolling endlessly on his phone, he flopped onto his bed, frustrated. His apartment felt eerily quiet. The only sound was the hum of the fridge from the kitchen. He stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. Why do I only feel motivated at random moments? He thought back to a time when he'd felt genuinely driven. It was a few months ago when his friend Marco shared a podcast about overcoming procrastination. Elliot had listened to it on his commute, and by the time he reached work, he felt unstoppable. That day, he checked off every task on his to-do list. But the next morning, the spark was gone. As he lay there, the memory tugged at him. Maybe that moment of motivation wasn't random after all. Maybe it had been triggered by something. Curious, he grabbed his phone and searched for the podcast. After a few taps, Marco's message popped up. "Check this out, changed my life." Elliot clicked the link. The familiar voice of the podcast host filled his room, calm and encouraging. He closed his eyes and listened. "Motivation isn't magic," the host said. "It's a response to inspiration. If you want to feel motivated, surround yourself with things that inspire you." Elliot sat up. Could it really be that simple? He decided to put it to the test. That night, he made a plan. Step 1. Find inspiration daily. Before going to sleep, he downloaded a few motivational podcasts. He'd listen to them every morning, starting tomorrow. Step 2. Change the environment. His apartment felt lifeless. He wanted it to feel like a place where action happened. He rearranged his desk, adding a small plant and a vision board. On it, he pinned quotes and pictures that reminded him of his goals. The next morning, Elliot woke up and hit play on the first podcast. As he brewed his coffee, the host's words washed over him. "Action creates momentum. Don't wait to feel motivated. Start moving, and motivation will follow." For the first time in weeks, Elliot felt a flicker of excitement. Maybe he was onto something. Elliot's mornings started to feel different. Each day, he pressed play on a new podcast episode while making coffee. The words filled the silence in his apartment, pushing back the heaviness that used to linger. It wasn't just background noise, it was fuel. At first, the change was subtle. He'd find himself standing a little straighter, making his bed without hesitation, or tackling his inbox right after breakfast. The small wins stacked up, and soon enough, he noticed a shift. One afternoon at work, Elliot's colleague, Maya, caught him typing furiously at his desk. "You're on fire today," she said, raising an eyebrow. "What's the secret?" He paused, surprised. "Honestly, podcasts." "Podcasts," she repeated, amused. "Yeah." He chuckled. "Every morning, I listen to people who've pushed through their own struggles. It makes me want to push through mine." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "Huh, I might try that." Later that evening, Elliot reflected on the conversation. Just a few weeks ago, he wouldn't have had anything positive to share. Now his coworkers noticed his energy. And more importantly, he felt it himself. But the real test came one rainy morning. His alarm buzzed, and the gray sky outside made it tempting to stay in bed. The warmth of his blankets was far more inviting than the cold tile of the kitchen floor. Old Elliot would have hit snooze. But not this time. Without thinking, he grabbed his phone and pressed play. "Success isn't about motivation," the familiar voice said. "It's about consistency. Build the habit, and the habit will build you." Elliot swung his legs out of bed and stood up. The coffee machine hummed to life, and the rain tapped softly against the window. As he sipped his coffee, he realized something important. The motivation wasn't random anymore. It was growing inside him, nurtured by the environment he'd created. The podcasts were more than words. They were reminders that every action counted. For the first time, he felt in control. The first month felt almost magical. Every morning, Elliot hit play, poured his coffee, and let the podcasts push him into action. His apartment felt brighter, his workdays more productive, and even his evenings carried a sense of accomplishment. He was building momentum. But then, life happened. One Friday, work exploded with back-to-back deadlines. Elliot found himself drowning in emails, spreadsheets, and urgent Slack messages. By the time he got home, he collapsed onto the couch, too drained to do anything but scroll mindlessly on his phone. The next morning, he slept through his alarm. No podcast, no coffee ritual, just silence. One day off turned into two. By Monday, he was snoozing his alarm again, skipping his morning routine, and grabbing fast food on the way to work. The voice that once guided him through the mornings faded into the background. What's the point? He muttered to himself one night, staring at the dark ceiling. I'll just lose momentum again. But something tugged at him. He wasn't ready to give up. That night, he opened his podcast app. The latest episode caught his eye. When you lose momentum, how to start again. Elliott hesitated, then hit play. Falling off track is normal, the host said. What matters isn't that you slipped. What matters is what you do next. Elliott sat up, heart pounding. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to take the next step. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. The floor felt cold beneath his feet, but he didn't care. He walked to the kitchen, brewed a cup of coffee, and stood quietly as the machine hissed and gurgled. The aroma filled the air. He pressed play on another episode. Don't wait to feel ready. Just begin. Elliott took a deep breath. It was time to begin again. The next morning, Elliott woke up before his alarm. The sky outside was still dark, and for a moment, he considered rolling over and going back to sleep. But then he remembered the podcast from the night before, the voice reminding him that perfection wasn't the goal. Consistency was. He grabbed his phone and pressed play. As the podcast host spoke, Elliott moved through his morning routine. Coffee brewed. He made his bed. The sound of the host's encouraging words filled the apartment, breaking the silence. Motivation isn't magic, the voice said. It's a byproduct of action. Don't wait for it. Create it. Elliott sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and stared at his to-do list. It felt overwhelming, but he remembered something from another episode. Start small. He picked the easiest task and did it. Then another, and another. By the time his coffee cup was empty, he'd already crossed off 3 things from his list. The weight that had been pressing down on him for days felt lighter. It wasn't the podcasts alone. It was the act of showing up, of deciding, each morning, to press play and take that first step. That night, Elliott reflected on the shift. He realized motivation wasn't something that struck randomly. It was something he could cultivate. The podcasts were his anchor. They reminded him of the power he had to shape his day every single morning. Elliott's mornings became sacred. Each day began the same. Coffee brewing, podcast playing, and a quiet sense of purpose settling over him. It wasn't always easy. Some mornings he still felt sluggish, but he'd learned something important. Action came first, feelings followed. One morning, as he was halfway through a podcast, a phrase struck him. You become what you surround yourself with. Elliott paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips. He looked around his apartment. The vision board on the wall was slowly filling up with inspiring quotes and images, but the rest of the space still felt stagnant. That weekend, he made a change. He reorganized his desk, clearing the clutter. He added a small bookshelf in the corner and filled it with titles recommended by the podcast hosts. He even bought a plant, a little green reminder that growth took time. His environment was beginning to reflect his mindset, and the more his surroundings changed, the more he did too. At work, his colleagues noticed the shift. Maya, the co-worker who'd teased him about podcasts, stopped by his desk one afternoon. You're like a machine lately, she said. Seriously, what's your secret? Elliott grinned. Podcasts, he said simply. And a little habit stacking. Habit stacking. Yeah, I pair things I need to do with things I enjoy. Coffee and podcasts in the morning. Stretching while I listen. Little routines that keep me on track. Maya raised an eyebrow. Huh, maybe I'll give it a try. Elliott shrugged. It works for me. That evening, he realized something. His motivation wasn't random anymore. It was cultivated, shaped by his environment, his routines, and the voices he surrounded himself with. He smiled. Maybe the secret had never been about chasing motivation. Maybe it was about creating the conditions where it could grow. Elliott's mornings felt almost automatic now. Wake up, brew coffee, hit play. The once random bursts of motivation were no longer a mystery. He had built a process, a system that nudged him forward, even on the days he didn't feel like it. But the real test came when the novelty wore off. One cold, gray morning, his alarm buzzed, and Elliott cracked open one eye. He felt off. No particular reason. He just didn't feel like doing anything. The old Elliott would have pulled the blankets over his head and scrolled through social media for an hour. But this Elliott knew better. He sat up and pressed play. The podcast host's familiar voice drifted through the quiet apartment. Motivation isn't a constant. It ebbs and flows. What matters is showing up, even when you don't feel like it. Elliott swung his legs over the side of the bed. Coffee, podcast, one small action. That's all he needed to start. And that was the secret, wasn't it? It wasn't about feeling motivated every single day. It was about creating systems that carried him through the days when he didn't. By the time he left for work, he felt lighter. Not because motivation had magically appeared, but because he'd shown up anyway. That evening, he added a new quote to his vision board. Motivation is fleeting. Discipline is what gets you to the finish line. Elliott smiled. He finally understood. As weeks turned into months, Elliott's newfound consistency began to ripple into other parts of his life. Work felt smoother. Deadlines weren't looming monsters anymore, but manageable milestones. His apartment stayed tidier. Even his sleep improved. One afternoon at work, Maya stopped by his desk again. "Okay," she said, leaning against his chair. "I tried the podcast thing." Elliott raised an eyebrow. "Oh," she sighed dramatically. "It didn't work. What were you listening to? Some guy yelling about waking up at 4 a.m. and taking ice baths?" She shivered. "Not my vibe." Elliott chuckled. "Yeah, that's a bit extreme." He grabbed a sticky note and scribbled down a few of his favorite shows. "Try these. Different styles. Some are more storytelling, some more practical advice. You just need to find the right voice." Maya took the note and tucked it into her pocket. "Thanks." That night, Elliott reflected on the conversation. He realized motivation wasn't one size fits all. What sparked his drive might not work for someone else, and that was okay. The important thing was finding what clicked and making space for it. As he added another quote to his vision board, he smiled. Motivation wasn't random. It was built, step by step, day by day. And he was just getting started. Elliott's days had settled into a rhythm, but he knew he wasn't done growing. The podcast had lit the spark, but now he wanted more. He found himself seeking out books, articles, and even TED Talks on motivation and habit formation. The more he learned, the more he realized one thing. Motivation wasn't a magical force. It was a skill. One evening, while scrolling through his podcast app, a title caught his eye: The Power of Accountability. Intrigued, he pressed play. The host's voice filled the room. "If you want to stay motivated, find someone who holds you accountable. We're more likely to follow through when someone else is expecting us to." Elliott paused. Accountability. He'd been doing this alone, but maybe it was time to change that. The next day at work, he found Maya in the break room. "Hey," he said, leaning against the counter. "Remember how you tried the podcasts?" She laughed. "How could I forget? I still haven't tried the ones you recommended." "Well," Elliott said, "what if we kept each other accountable? Like, pick a goal, check in every week, and make sure we're both sticking with it." Maya raised an eyebrow. "You want to be my accountability buddy?" "Sure. Why not?" She considered it for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but only if you promise not to judge me if I slip up." "Deal." That night, Elliott felt something new: excitement. He wasn't just building habits anymore. He was building a support system. And for the first time, motivation didn't feel random. It felt like a choice. The accountability pact with Maya added a new layer of purpose to Elliott's journey. Every Friday, they grabbed coffee and checked in on their goals. Maya wanted to start journaling every morning, while Elliott focused on sticking to his morning routine and finishing a side project he'd been putting off for months. Their check-ins weren't always perfect. Some weeks, one of them would slip up, skip a morning, hit snooze too many times, or fall back into old habits. But instead of judgment, they offered encouragement. "Missed a day," Maya would say, shrugging. "Big deal. Show up tomorrow." Elliott realized that motivation wasn't just about external inspiration. It thrived in connection, knowing someone else was rooting for you. One day, after their coffee chat, Maya asked, "So, what's next for you?" Elliott hesitated. "What do you mean? You've built this solid morning routine, you're keeping up with work, and you're pretty much a podcast guru at this point. But what's the next step?" The question lingered in his mind long after she left. He'd been so focused on building consistency that he hadn't stopped to think about where it was taking him. That evening, he sat down with a blank notebook and wrote one question at the top of the page. "What do I really want?" As the words spilled onto the paper, Elliott felt a spark. Motivation wasn't about chasing random bursts of energy. It was about building the kind of life that didn't rely on them. Elliott stared at the blank page for a long time. What did he really want? In the past, his goals had always been vague. Things like get in shape or be more productive. But now, something felt different. He didn't just want fleeting wins. He wanted purpose. He started writing. Wake up early and enjoy mornings without rushing. Finish that side project, a personal blog he'd abandoned months ago. Find work that excites him, not just pays the bills. Keep growing. Keep learning. The next morning, he shared his list with Maya. She nodded thoughtfully. Okay, so what's the first step? The blog, Elliott said, surprising himself. I've been putting it off forever. But if I can build a morning routine, I can build a writing habit too. That evening, he set a simple rule. Just write for 10 minutes. No expectations. No pressure. Just show up. The first night felt awkward. He stared at the blinking cursor and wrote a few clumsy sentences. But the next night was a little easier. And the night after that, the words flowed faster. It wasn't about feeling inspired. It was about showing up, day after day. The motivation came later, once he saw the progress stacking up. One night, after hitting publish on his first blog post in over a year, Elliott leaned back in his chair and smiled. Random motivation? That wasn't what fueled him anymore. He'd built something stronger, momentum. Weeks passed, and Elliott's writing habit grew stronger. What once felt like a chore had become something he looked forward to, a quiet ritual at the end of each day. His blog slowly filled with posts about personal growth, motivation, and the lessons he was learning along the way. One evening, as he finished editing a post, he noticed a new comment from a reader. Your words really hit home. I've been struggling to stay motivated, but your story made me realize I don't have to wait for inspiration. Thank you. Elliott stared at the screen, heart racing. It was a simple message, but it meant everything. Later that night, he sat quietly, reflecting on how far he'd come. He thought back to those days when he waited for random bursts of motivation to strike, when he felt powerless, like his drive was controlled by something outside of him. Now he knew the truth. Motivation wasn't random. It was something you created. Every morning he showed up. Every time he pressed play on a podcast or put pen to paper, he was building momentum. And that momentum had transformed his life. As he closed his laptop and turned off the light, Elliott smiled to himself. Motivation might not always be there, but he didn't need it anymore. He had something better. He had discipline. And that made all the difference.